How does Nebraska make noise in the Big Ten? It's a very simple answer. Dylan Raiola has to look like the guy he wants to be, which is, of course, Patrick Mahomes. Connor Happer of Locked On Nebraska is joining me here. Connor, what is the situation in your view for Matt Rhule going into year 3? You've got a sophomore quarterback, good first year under his belt, made a bowl game, won that bowl game. Things are looking up. But it is time, right, to kind of take that next step into the upper echelon of the Big Ten?
Well, there's definitely some pressure to do that. And I think they felt that, at the ending point of last year when they got rid of Marcus Satterfield as the offensive coordinator. He's still on the staff. He's as the tight ends coach. And they brought in Dana Holgorsen. And for the last 3 games of last year, it was sort of about making things comfortable and finding the right synergy with Dylan Raiola and Marcus Satterfield in the offense. And now they've had to retool under the tutelage of Dana Holgorsen. They brought in a new wide receiver coach who has the connection to Dana Holgorsen and Da'Keel Shorts from Kentucky. And then they brought in Kentucky's best wide receiver from last year in Dane Key. And that's, when you start at personnel, when you talk about personnel for Nebraska next year and what they've done to improve off of 2024, it starts there at the wide receiver position. We don't know for sure that they're going to be better. They got a transfer going into 2024 in Jamal Banks, who was a productive receiver at Wake Forest, and Isaiah Nair, who had kind of been up and down and injuries throughout his career. But I think they feel like they have some proven production with Dane Key from Kentucky and Isaiah Hunter from Cal, and a couple of the guys that they're bringing back, including Ja'Cory Barney, who had a great freshman year this past year. Running backs is still a little bit light. Emmett Johnson's going to be the guy there. We'll see what else they can find outside of that. But you're right. It centers around Raiola and the connection there with Dana Holgorsen. And my guess would be that they turn up the tempo a little bit, and it's not going to be your slow and plodding, let's find a way to get first downs and string out 9-minute drives here. Obviously, if they could do that, that'd be great. But I think they want to score some points in 2025.
Holgorsen was the good coaching news for Nebraska this offseason. The less than ideal news was a defensive coordinator going to Florida State. I think that's a great hire by Mike Norvell because Nebraska's defensive staff the last 2 years, one of the best in all of college football. Immediate turnaround, and it wasn't about, radically reshifting the roster. They just came in and were better schematically. So on that side of the ball, are they going to have the defense to support the Cornhuskers in the offense?
They're going to turn over a lot. They're losing a few guys who, were around the program for 5 and 6 years. That doesn't have to be a bad thing, but there was some comfort over the last couple of years in knowing what to expect from guys like Nash Hutmaker and Ty Robinson up front, and a couple guys in the secondary who will get NFL tryouts and end up in camps and stuff like that as well. So they'll lose a lot. They definitely did some things for themselves in the transfer portal, probably got themselves a starting corner or two, and some interesting pieces like Dasan McCullough, who transferred originally from Indiana and then Oklahoma. A couple guys in the defensive line, including Williams Nwerny, who I think is the headliner that people are talking about. We'll see how he fits into the puzzle. But yeah, they elevated John Butler, who joined their staff, suddenly at the beginning of the season in 2024 when Nebraska had to make a coaching staff change, and he went in and was the defensive backs coach right away, and then is immediately elevated to defensive coordinator. And so we'll see how that fits in. They've retooled some of their defensive staff as well. They, Terrence Knighton went with Tony White to Florida State. So they took their defensive line coach along with them. So Nebraska has got a new defensive line coach, and Terry Braden, who comes along from the Chiefs. So it's a lot of turnover, but I do think there's a good base to sort of start there for Nebraska, and it'll always be a Matt Rhule defense. Matt Rhule said when he got to Nebraska, he said, we're always going to be good at defense. It doesn't matter if Tony's the coach. It doesn't matter if somebody else. Like, this is the staple. This is what we do. He brought in Phil Snow, who's his longtime trusted, kind of right-hand man, defensive coordinator type of guy, to come in and kind of help oversee things a little bit as well. So I think they have a pretty good, solid nucleus to work off of. And I think you have to trust Rhule at his word when he says they're always going to have a pretty good defense.
Nebraska has something schedule-wise next year that not a lot of teams in college football ever get to say, which is not their first 3 games are at home, not their first 4 games are at home, their first 5 games are all played at home. This is something only Michigan usually gets away with from a scheduling standpoint, Connor, and that's a sizable break when you are continuing to develop a second-year quarterback and you have all this turnover, not throwing in the wrinkles of traveling in college football. I think that's a pretty sizable advantage for the Cornhuskers here.
Well, it's a long time coming too. I mean, they did start 2024 with UTEP at home, and that felt like the first, normal game that they've had at home in a very, very, to start the season in a long time. They played in Ireland. They were supposed to play a game in Ireland. They ended up playing it at Illinois. They had a game canceled with Akron in Scott Frost's first season in 2018. So they had a COVID year where they started the season in late October. So there's been a lot going on. This one will be a little weird in the sense that their first game is at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City.
I was just about to correct myself on that one, but still, no true road games in the first 5.
You're not wrong, because Kansas City is a 3-hour drive from Lincoln, and it will be full of Nebraska fans. It's Cincinnati's home game, technically. The game was originally scheduled for Cincinnati, and then it was moved to Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, and then it was moved to Kansas City. Cincinnati's going to, they're going to bleed the Husker fans out for a bunch of money, it seems, which more power to them. But there'll be 70,000 Nebraska fans at that game. So it's kind of like a home game, and you're right. I mean, it's a really, really nice lead in. There's some landmines in there. Michigan is going to be a huge game in late September. And then Michigan State right after that. But man, it is a real blessing starting the conference season at home and starting the season with a bunch of home environments right out of the gate. It bode well for them. It'll be a big measuring stick game against Michigan, no matter what happens in those first 3.
Yeah, I mean, Michigan at home on the heels of back-to-back tune-ups against Akron and Houston Christian. And then before you play Michigan State, who I think is a sneaky, kind of dangerous team going into Jonathan Smith's second year. I don't think they're top of the conference, but I mean, they're 5-7 this past year. They pulled an upset of Iowa, which some people, host of the show, predicted during the season. But having them at home off of a bye, that's an incredibly favorable start. And I mean, you look at the road slate, at Penn State, maybe you should chalk that one up as a loss right now, Cornhusker fans, but I look at every other game, and I think Nebraska is either going to have a really good shot or will just be the outright favorite. I mean, their other road games are at UCLA, at Minnesota, at Maryland. Minnesota's tougher than people probably realize, but I mean, overall, Connor, like this feels so gettable that if Nebraska were to regress and miss a bowl game, that'd be a colossal failure.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that would be a huge, huge red flag for Matt Rhule. That would not go over well. So yeah, they need to take a step up for sure. And the schedule is always going to be, it's always been impactful. It was when Nebraska was in the Big Ten West, and there was always opportunities to take advantage of it, and they never seemingly did. But I think it follows a pretty similar path of what it has, where you look at it, if you're a Nebraska fan and you're saying, well, there's only like one scheduled loss on here, and you referenced the Penn State game, and I think that's probably right. Usually for Nebraska, it's Ohio State. They have a hard time avoiding Ohio State. This time it's Penn State, and they kind of switched that out at the right moment. But Wisconsin's off the schedule this year, but we don't know which direction they're sort of headed. Minnesota's back on it. Northwestern's back on the schedule for Nebraska this year. You flip with USC and UCLA, where you played out at the Rose Bowl last year, and you played out at the
Coliseum
last year. So it's gettable, and you might have everything in front of you when you make the trip to Happy Valley, and I'm sure that there will be snow on the ground when they play each other on November 22nd. But if you're dreaming, you're thinking that game's going to have some stakes, and I think that's kind of what people want around here.
I think that Michigan game is just going to say a lot. And remember, Nebraska was off to a 6-1 start this year, and then it all kind of went downhill in a couple ways. But overall, successful year. I'm not going to say 10 wins is something I'd expect, but I'm saying 9 wins, though I predicted that for Nebraska last year. They let me down a little.
Hey, but they weren't that far off.
No, they were not.
And still, I don't think they got the most out of what they could have got out of that team. So I agree. There's some real opportunity for some upside, I think, this year.